Mises against socialism. But the question, the real question is the end for the end for the socialists and the liberals and the libertarians, is it really a question of maximal satisfaction of subjective desire? Then of course you are fully in that utilitarian perspective where there is nothing else but reason, being, and ought to be the slave of the passions. Right? And that is why I add it here, because sometimes these free market libertarians say they are not utilitarian, and then they go on producing libertarian, or utilitarian arguments in disguise, right? In the disguise of economic theory. But you have to be very careful with the theory. Problems are thinking as a libertarian theorist, similar to the critique of utilitarianism. Why should the demand for justice outweigh the demand for injustice? If you look at the democratic politics, you see that people want to live at the expense of others. That's a much more powerful demand, has been over the past century, than say, no, let me just keep my money that I make. Very little is made in this free market libertarianism of the use of property to deprive others of their freedom, because property becomes a sort of absolute. There is no metaphysical absolute, so the only thing that is absolute when you drop the metaphysical aspect becomes the physical aspect of property. And this use of property to deprive others of their freedom is, of course, basically history. Think of the problem of hostile encirclement. You live in a valley, your family is a community living in a valley in the Alps. There's one exit. You own, as a community, as families, the land in the valley, but of course not the land outside the valley. And then someone comes to the valley, not in, but just in front of it, and homesteads all the land that gives access to your valley. Now the only way for you to get your produce to the market is by crossing the land of that other man. Right? So he says, okay, you can cross, but it will cost you. Right? So you have a toll, not a toll road, because there is no road at all, but simply the right of passage has to be paid for. And if such a right of property can be enforced, then of course you can use your property to enslave people, to deprive them of their property and so on. Now, hundreds of situations where you can apply this reasoning, but you can also find hundreds and thousands of examples in history, because the state was not the original establishment. States grew out of people becoming richer and more powerful in their property holdings, and, for example, cornering the market, cornering access, making access to other lands very difficult. But if you have no natural law perspective, which is outside these all sorts of subjective things, then of course you can only say, well, property right should be absolutely defended. There is no question of justice, no question of argumentation, no question of reason. It is just where are the landmarks delineating one property from another. A special problem for those who have this free market libertarianism combined into anarcho-capitalism, and I'm often associated with that because I am basically an anarchist, but natural law anarchist would fit rather better than this mechanical approach to freedom. when you talk about the market, and then people say, yes, but still property rights and contract rights and all these elements in your theory have to be secured. There has to be a government to enforce them. And they say, no, that's not necessary. And indeed, it's not necessary. But of course, proving that it is possible to have protection of property without rights is not the same as proving that it is likely to happen. There's this famous article which is cited everywhere in the libertarian literature. I've cited it probably as the first in my book. I don't remember what it's called, The Not So Wild Wild West, right? And it shows how in California, in the first half of the 19th century, without there being a state, the gold miners, the prospectors, maintained an adequate, fairly adequate system of law protection. Right? So there were courts and there were detectives and there was all sorts of arrangements. What many people cite that without having read the article, because it ends with examples also from United States 19th century history, where there was no successful development of a market for protection services. Right? And this was the battle, for example, between the ranchers and the farmers. Right? There was no spontaneous settlement there. And if you look at the California experience of the gold miners, the thing that is remarkable is that all these people were, as it were, equal in a material sense. Right? There were no rich people and poor people. There were richer and poorer people. And equally important, they all had the same weapons. A gun was a gun. Right? It was not a machine gun against a small handgun. It was not a bomb against a few knives and so on. This was a very equal distribution of firepower, and that of course made it much more easy to have this sort of free market protection service develop. If you do not have the right conditions, then of course the imbalances multiply immediately. And you can imagine, if you have a thought experiment about what would happen today if you simply think away the state and say, well, we have free market protection services. Would you see Halliburton or some other big corporation providing cheap protection services which no local provider can compete with? Within the shortest moments, you have large corporations dominating the sector. And if the age of Halliburton or whatever is past, then we are entering the age of the Chinese defense corporations, right, entering the market, which is perhaps not the thing we are most likely to enjoy. Right?
But is that a good thing that they would achieve a monopoly? The problem is the transaction cost when you have too many actors on the market for security.
If you look at the, I can quote Adam Smith on this. Right? There is never a company of businessmen that when they meet they are discussing ways to subvert the public interest. And the first thing, armed corporations, when they provide protection services, the first thing they are going to do for purely economic reasons is to make an agreement of market sharing, territorial market sharing, with very little exceptions. Why? Because you are not going to compete with weapons if your interest is mainly commercial. So you will minimize your conflicts with the competitors and concentrate absolutely on the public you are serving as a monopolist, right? Because otherwise you are You have the ridiculous idea that, for example, you feel betrayed by your protection agency and it's a conflict, and so you as a customer say, well, I'm going over to the competition. Well, they do not care. But if they do care, they are certainly not going to, the competition is not going to say, you can come with us and we are going to make war on the other. Because how much value do you have as a single customer for such a large corporation? So the element of scale is important when it comes to protecting individual rights. Now, I think I'm going to end here. I had lots of other pictures, but...
We can discuss during dinner.
During dinner?
During lunch.
During lunch?
During lunch, with my mouth full. Okay, so if you have questions, quick questions.
So what's your solution? How do we come to a libertarian society?
Well, I have to go to the last frame here. That's quite a bit. What I mean is, rather than say we have a formula as libertarian, at least as an old or pre-libertarian, I say rather than have a sort of this is ready for use product, which is often presented as libertarianism in some articles, I say, well, the basic thing is to keep things to the human level where people can participate in the business of arguing and negotiating for themselves rather than have to be represented by distant representatives. Now, just to give you an idea of what you missed. What happens here?
Just come on.
Okay. This is the world of corporations, artificial, conventional persons, and so on. Natural law, which is where I began, has to do with natural persons, right? Person to person, where one person is just the independent and equal of others. So in the arrangement of natural law, there is no place for government because it's person to person. But an important order of human life, which has almost disappeared from Western society, right, is the community. For the greater part of history, and still in the greater part of the world, people are neither in a pure convivial order of natural law, nor in a well-structured society. What is, for the Dutch speakers, a maatschappij. That is an organized thing. So most people are in community, and community has no formal government, but it has an informal hierarchy of deference. So you know who the people are whose opinions carry weight, who have studied, because communities are very selective things. And communities intermediate between the two extremes, the convivial order, which in Dutch I use the word convivial because it's a translation of the Dutch samenleving, convivere. So the pure samenleving, which has no structure and no preconceived notions of value or opinion. So this is one abstract but very real alternative, and this is another. This is a universal. If you are meeting a person of goodwill, can be someone from the next village, can be someone from another part of the world, but as a tourist, for example, you deal with the common people all over the world on a common basis. You do not have to know all the details of their regulations, of their religion, of their position in society. If they have a position in society, you just go with them person to person. And this is the basic, the daily life phenomenon. The Middle Ages showed the sturdiness of daily life.